All right, joining me now here on the Matthew Filipowicz Show is Imani Gandy. Imani is a senior legal analyst at RH Reality Check, which you can find at rhrealitycheck.org. She is the writer of the Angry Black Lady Chronicles and the editor-at-large at This Week in Blackness. She is also the co-host of the podcast, This Week in Blackness in the Morning, all of which you can find at thisweekinblackness.com. You can also follow her on Twitter at Angry Black Lady. Imani, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. Very happy to be here.
All right, so Imani, you recently wrote at RH Reality Check about the 20-week abortion bans that red states all over the country are passing.
Yeah.
And purple states, frankly, some of them, Wisconsin and whatnot. They're happening in a lot of different places. Ultimately, a lot of these things get struck down on certain levels, but ultimately what we are looking at is we're going to be trying to find a pathway to the ultimate decision, which will come down from the Supreme Court. Discuss that a little bit and what the actual pathway might actually look like.
Well, as you know, over the past couple of years, there have been just an overwhelming number of bills, anti-abortion restrictions that have been passed in states around the country. And a lot of people tend to sort of throw up their hands and just think, oh my gosh, what are these Republicans doing? Why are they doing this? But if you actually look at the strategy and you start to look at what folks like the National Right to Life Committee and some of these other anti-abortion, anti-choice organizations are doing, what they really are hoping to do is to force the Supreme Court to review Roe v. Wade and the cases that follow from Roe v. Wade, like Planned Parenthood versus Casey. And these cases provide for a constitutional right to abortion up until the point of fetal viability. So the issue becomes, how do the anti-choice forces sort of roll back either the point of viability using junk science, or how do they sort of persuade the particular justices who they think are amenable to their cause to undo 40 years worth of abortion jurisprudence? And so the general thinking is that some of these laws are not going to make it that far. I mean, a lot of these laws are being struck down at the lower court level. For example, the admitting privileges laws, like the one that we're seeing in Wisconsin, where abortion doctors are required to have admitting privileges at a hospital within 30 miles of where the abortion is performed. Well, that one has been struck down in Wisconsin. It's been struck down in Alabama, also in Mississippi. So those laws are probably not going to make it that far. Then you can look at laws like the ultrasound laws that are passed in conjunction with these women with pithily titled names like Women's Right to Know. Like Women's Right to Know. They force doctors to read this script about, how horrible abortion is and how you're probably going to end up killing yourself if you get one, if you don't get breast cancer first. And it's all this crap science that really has no basis whatsoever. So the ultrasound law is another possible pathway. And right now, the only ultrasound law that has passed the appellate court level is the one in the Fifth Circuit in Texas. There was one passed in North Carolina that the lower court has preliminarily enjoined, which means it has been blocked, but yet the case has not gone forward on the merits. And then the Oklahoma Supreme Court actually struck down an ultrasound law there, and sort of begged the Supreme Court to take the case on, but the Supreme Court didn't bite. So most people kind of agree that it's the 20-week abortion bans that are going to be the ones that are going to really test the stability of Roe versus Wade. Right now, bans have been passed in 12 states. Fetal pain 20-week abortion bans have been passed in 12 states. There's a 20-week abortion ban in North Carolina that was passed in something like 1967, but Guttmacher doesn't count that as part of the new slate of abortion bills because it wasn't tied to fetal pain. And this fetal pain argument is something that you see a lot of red state and purple state legislatures really honing in on because it's a way to sort of tug at people's heartstrings. You talk about, oh, well, these poor innocent unborn children, they feel pain. I mean, they use these studies that show fetuses tend to react when prodded, stuff like that. But the general consensus is that fetuses don't feel pain until about the 24th week, which is about the point of viability. So fetal pain is already sort of tied to viability if you're looking at good science. But what these anti-choice forces are doing is using crap science that has been resoundingly debunked by any reputable organization, except for organizations like, Christian Gynecologists for Life or something like that, where you get these really obviously partisan anti-abortion organizations. And then you have there are people like David Reardon, who has developed an organization called the Elliott Institute in Springfield, Illinois, where basically for the past decade or two, they have been developing this junk science using techniques that are widely known to be completely anti-scientific. They don't follow the sort of peer review process that scientists normally have to go through in order to get their science to be deemed actual science. So what they do is they sort of have this echo chamber of crap science and crap scientists that publish these crap scientific studies in all of these different journals, and then they sort of refer back to each other in order to sort of present a case that this science is actually science when it's anything but. It's just a bunch of anti-abortion, anti-scientific people just sort of backing each other up.
Well, that really is a right-wing technique that they mastered, the whole idea of the echo chamber, and it's something that they kick our butts on the left with fairly consistently. Is just the way that if you have one thing that turns to another, you actually, and eventually that kind of becomes public opinion.
Right, and that's exactly what's happened. I mean, you can see that in the polling now when, they ask questions about, do you support a 20-week abortion ban? The people, if they were to ask the proper question, and if they were to actually frame the question in a way that is based in science, I bet you would see the poll numbers shift dramatically. But instead, what's going on is that you have legislatures that are incorporating this junk science into the bills themselves. And so, for example, in Texas or at the 20-week abortion ban at the federal level, you've got pages and pages and pages of junk science, of citations to scientists that come out of places like the Elliott Institute. And so the legislatures are really just looking at the science saying, okay, this is fact. This is fact. And so then once those cases go to the courts don't normally question legislative findings of fact. They just accept the facts as presented to them as true, even if they're not facts. So by the time it gets to the court, and by the time, to the lower courts, and then to the appeals courts, and then to the Supreme Court, it becomes more and more difficult to question the basis for this quote unquote scientific knowledge. And so that's really what we're seeing here in Arizona. Fortunately, in Arizona, the Ninth Circuit struck down Arizona's 20-week abortion ban. But if you look at the district court opinion, I mean, it's just full of crap, really. I mean, it's just shocking how successful. I mean, I sort of have to hand it to, as much as I can't stand anti-abortion advocates, I kind of have to hand it to them. They've been really smart in the way that they've gone about incorporating this science into the legislation, changing legislators' mind about what science is, changing public opinion about what science is, to the point where you've got organizations or you've got, major media outlets that are reporting stories about 20-week abortion bans without really questioning the science behind them and making clear that it's not just that, reasonable people can disagree. It's not a both sides do it type of thing. It's they're wrong and we're right. But, it's very, for some, abortion is such a controversial issue that I think it's hard for media outlets to really just take a stand when it comes to basic things like science, because they don't want to be seen as being partisan, or they don't want to be seen as taking a side when you really can't take a side on science. Science either is or it isn't.
There are facts and there are fiction. Right. And if there's something as a fact, it's a fact.
Right. And right now we're sort of battling the tide of misinformation in the mainstream media, misinformation that's being propagated by anti-choice forces. And by the time you've got organizations like Center for Reproductive Rights or the ACLU or Planned Parenthood or whomever is challenging these laws, it becomes this multi-headed hydra where you have to, restate what the law already is, restate that 20-week abortion bans are flatly constitutional because they ban abortion before the fetus is viable. I mean, that's unconstitutional. But what they're trying to do is make it seem like, well, maybe viability is in question. Medical standards can change. And yes, medical standards can change in the minds of people who are willing to buy crap science, because the crap science is forcing these medical standards to change, even though they're not changing, if that makes any sense.